we have Sarah Alsaidi. She's a PhD student in counseling psychology at Teachers College at Columbia University. Please help me welcome her with a warm round of applause.
Okay, great. Can everyone hear me? I know I don't have a projecting voice. Is that okay? Okay, is that better? Okay, great. My name is Sarah. I'm a counseling psychology doctorate student at Columbia University Teachers College. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Yemeni American, Yemeni Arab American. My research tends to sort of split in two. I think when I began the program, I was very interested in stigma, right? Mental health stigma, which I'm kind of glad that my presentation followed the two previous ones, because I think each of you kind of alluded to stigma among Arab Americans. So that's one aspect that I'm really interested in. And the other piece that I think is more recent for me is experiences of discrimination among Arab Americans, and particularly women, particularly after the political climate recently. I also wanted to mention, and I think, especially since you all are here at this conference, I'm also one of the co-founders of the Mental Health Awareness Conference at Teachers College. So if any of you are in the New York and New Jersey area or in the mood to drive or take a flight, this is a really amazing conference. It's student-led, and this year we have an amazing panel, and I'd be happy to talk to you about it afterwards if you have more questions. But for today, I'm going to be talking about a study that I conducted with 3 other students at Teachers College. And this study is on help-seeking behavior among Muslim Arab Americans. Talal al-Humaizi was the principal investigator, and I also worked with Nawal Muradwaj and Ali Molay. We worked on this project for 2 years. And I'll also go through some of the process because this is qualitative. So it takes a much longer time, but then you get more detailed results. And you really get to the heart of the problem. Okay, I want to make sure I'm good on time. So mental health underutilization is a major problem. And I think this has been documented among other racial and ethnic minority groups, such as African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans. And I know Dr. Al-Karnawi was here, at least he was here yesterday, and he spoke about, he does research on Arab Americans in Israel or in other Middle Eastern countries. But there still remains a gap on Arab Americans. And that's sort of what I'm trying to fill. And so why is this even important? Why did we do this research project? What does it even fulfill for us? And I remember there's a woman who spoke yesterday, and she does work around domestic violence, and I think you're here. And you were talking about how we're trying to do the services and we're trying to give to our community, but there's not enough research, right? And so even though some of our findings are sort of typical, if you're Arab, you're like, yeah, my dad says that. There's not enough research documenting that. And without that research, you can't get the funding, you can't get the grants. And that's why I think that's why I sort of, I started in nonprofit, and I started by providing services, and then I sort of shifted towards research, because I was like, I need to do this. I need to be the one that's gonna, publish these studies, create these studies so that I can apply for grants and funding and implement them into programs. Obviously, the other reasons that research like this is important too is, to contribute to our knowledge on cultural competence, right? So if you're a counselor, if you're a practitioner in the field, what are some of the things that you need to know if you're working with Arab Americans? And I'll also talk later about one of my ideas to create a mental health literacy program. And I think if any of you are interested in collaborating or even talking to me about that, I would be really open to that. So I want to talk a little bit about the methods and data analysis, because I think that's super important, right? You want to question researchers. What did you do? How did you get the data that you have? How did you come to these conclusions? So I'll talk briefly about that. So as I mentioned, this is a qualitative study, and so we did individual face-to-face interviews. And some of the questions that we asked participants, they were open-ended questions like, can you describe what mental illness means to you? Or what do you believe are the causes of mental illness? Our participants were 10 laypersons, so those are people from the community. And then we also interviewed 7 key informants. And so those were psychologists, psychiatrists, 2 imams, social workers, and mental health counselors. So we also have that data to inform some of our findings. The coding process is long. It took us 2 years to complete this study, and I think I'm a bit of a qualitative girl because I tend to do a lot of qualitative research. But this qualitative study was a thematic analysis influenced by grounded theory. And so it starts with first transcribing all the interviews, which takes forever. And then you have to create a team of coders. So it was me, Dalal, Nawal, and Ali. We would each take each transcript each week and go home, and we would code them ourselves individually. So we would code for emerging themes, anything that kind of comes up, and we would code those, and then we would meet weekly and review those transcripts line by line, and say, for the lines 1 through 3, I coded it as this. What did you guys code it as? And then we would go through like a consensus process to make sure that there's reliability and it's valid. And then at the end, once we created a code book, there's axial coding, right? So that means that you have to go back in and then start organizing some of the codes that you agreed on into larger emerging themes. So before I talk about the results and findings, I want to talk about this socio-ecological model that we're sort of following. And if you think about a person, right, you have resources on different levels, right? So on the individual level, it's you, yourself, right? The things that you can do on your own. So that's very internal. And then on the interpersonal level is you and your close family and your close friends and the resources that exist there. And then on the immediate community for a Muslim or Arab population is like the mosque, the masjid, or a cultural center. And then on the larger environment is the general public and society, right? So some of the clinics that might exist, or the hospitals, or the schools. So as you can see, this is one of our major findings, is that stigma is a major barrier, which is not surprising, right? But the reason that it's interesting, and I'll go into this more, is that we found that stigma exists differently or looks differently on each of these different levels. And I'll outline those and also include some of our participant quotes and stuff like that. And then if you see on this outside, I'll talk about that later, that's like cross-cutting features, so I'll get to that later. Okay, so on the first individual level, there's self-stigma, right? Which is like internalized stigma, the stigma that you internalize that you might have heard from someone else and you start to internalize about yourself, right? So we have here participant 7 who says, "Are you crazy? Do you talk to yourself? Do you see things? That's how I felt people look at me. Especially I didn't tell my parents ever about it. I never brought it up." And you can see this could be a major barrier, because if you're afraid to bring it up even to your own family, then you're less likely to seek services or support. And 5 out of 10 of our laypersons endorsed self-stigma. On the interpersonal level is associative stigma. So for Arabs, this is, and I think a lot of the data that I'm discussing can actually be generalized for other Muslim populations, but because our population was Arab Muslim Americans, that's why I'm sort of specifying. But for Arabs, there's this concept of your reputation, right? So if you do something, it's not just you, you're representing your entire family, right? And so if you're stigmatized as an individual, it's not just you, your entire family is stigmatized. And this is called associative stigma, and I think was coined by Dr. Corrigan. Here we have participant 6 who says, "I mean, it's a big deal, I guess, to know that someone in your family is going through a problem, because it makes you wonder what's going on in that house and why is the person going through something. Some people might look down upon the family." And 12 out of our 17 laypersons and key informants endorsed associative stigma. On the community level is social stigma, right? So this is the stigma that we see that's more common, right? Like, oh, she's just being lazy, or they're weak, or they're dangerous. And for Arabs, something that was interested is this belief that mental illness or mental health issues are contagious, right? So here we have participant 4 who says, like, if you're a parent and you have a child, and we're talking about a child who has a problem, you probably wouldn't want your child to interact or play with that other child or whatever. And 100% of our laypersons endorse this belief. And so this is kind of eye-opening, right? To see it, in research, to see it proven. And then lastly, on the universal, the larger environment level, there's universal stigma. That's the stigma that we see, institutionally. Like, how does it impact whether or not you can be employed, or how does it impact, treatment, stigma of treatment, or stigma of the profession as a whole, or stigma of the discipline. I remember when I first wanted to pursue psychology, my family was so afraid for me. Like, "Sarah, what are you doing? Like, you're are you sure you want to do this? I was like, I'm sure, I'm positive. And I also, I worked on inpatient unit, and I remember just how terrified my mom was and how some of that, started to become internalized for me, and I had to work through that. So I think as professionals, that's really important, right? We tend to internalize some of those stigmas, and we have to work through them ourselves. And so this participant, just talks about, if you're setting up a table at a college fair or something like that, that you might have more people showing up for, something that says blood pressure, come check your blood pressure, than like mental health. And 6 out of 10 of our laypersons endorse this. This is really interesting. So at TC, I work on the intersectionality lab, so I think a lot of what I do is very like, oh, intersectional identity, I'm constantly bringing that in, but I think this came up on its own. So intersectional stigma is the concept that people hold multiple identities, and if you're a minority, you might hold multiple minority identities, and so you're stigmatized on multiple levels. So for an Arab American, you might be stigmatized from your Arab culture, but then gender plays in as well, right? So we found that for men, and I think this answers your question, Dr. Jameen, about is it that there's less men in the profession because it's stigmatized? I would say yes, 100%, right? And there's this concept of rajula and Arab culture of masculinity, and you're the man, you take care of the household, you need to, you can't complain about anything, nothing's ever wrong with you. And so here, we have participant 7 who says, I think it's completely, almost nearly impossible for a guy to go to his friends and tell them that he's depressed, because the whole concept of rajula. For women, it sort of flips, right? You're stigmatized in a different way. You're stigmatized because you're a woman and you're seen as sensitive or weak, or maybe she's on her period. And so participant 6, was actually a male and is talking about someone who told them, disclosed to him that they might be bulimic or they have some issue going on, and he said, she could just be telling me that she's bulimic to get my attention. I don't know if she had the symptoms. I mean, she just verbally told me I'm throwing up. So there's this idea that, women are just seeking attention, or it's a phase, or she'll get over it. And 16 out of our 17 lay participants and key informants endorse this concept of intersectional stigma. So I mentioned that there's like these cross-cutting factors, and they're on the side. I'm not going to get to all of them, but I thought beliefs would be the most interesting to talk about. So in the literature, I think what's really important for me to say as a counseling psychologist is, when we're thinking about cultural competence, we're not talking about Muslim Arab Americans and saying, oh, your belief is wrong, or because you believe that a jinn possessed someone, that you're false or you're ignorant, right? We're not saying that. We're saying that those are your beliefs, and that's not the problem. The problem is when we over-explain everything with jinn or other narratives, right? So that's the problem, and I want to make sure in my presentation that I'm not saying your beliefs are not valid, right? There's the biological, social causes, those exist, right? But we're also Muslim, and these things are, written in the Quran, so I'm not going to dismiss those also. So there's 2 types of narratives, right? There's the religious narrative, and here participant 9 says, if I'm complaining, then maybe I'm not being, a loyal servant or like a good Muslim. And so the religious narrative can sometimes be split, right? And there's different narratives to that, pieces to that. So some of them can be a hindrance to help seeking, and some of them are actually facilitators. And as professionals, I kind of highlight the facilitators because I think it's important for us to harness like what already exists in the community, rather than say like, hey, let's kick out everything and this is what we should teach, or this is what we should do. So the first is, like the belief that, if something is wrong with me, if I'm dealing with a mental health issue, it's a weakness in faith, right? And some people say like, oh, you should pray more, or, and while prayer is a great coping mechanism and is great for health, right? Sometimes it can be dismissive in the way that it's said, so it depends on the intention. But if you believe it's a weakness in faith, then you might also believe that it's a punishment from God. And then there's 2 narratives, right? You can believe it's a punishment from God, so I must bear it, right? I must have sabr. I must just bear it and do nothing about it. And that's a hindrance, right? That means that you don't actually seek help, you don't get support. On the other side is you believe, yeah, this is God's plan, this is God's will, but God wants me to do something about it. I accept it for that reason, and in that way it's a facilitator because it helps acceptance, that process, but then it also helps with, I'm gonna seek help, I'm gonna reach out, I'm gonna get the right support. And something else that's interesting is that there's a lot of pro-help seeking hadiths and ayahs in the Quran that I think professionals can use in their therapy sessions, you know, to say like, it is okay that you're seeking help. It is okay that you're seeking medication, or, you know, just sort of normalizing those things from the lens of Islam. And then there's the supernatural narrative, right? So here, participant 1 says, I honestly, truly believe that mental illness and shaitan go hand in hand. And while shaitan and possession doesn't explain every mental illness, right, because we know there are other causes and it's stigmatized in that way, it's sort of interesting because I think only one participant endorsed the actual belief, but 11 out of our 17 participants endorsed that it's a common held belief in the community. And so it's something we need to be paying attention to. And so even when we're doing programs around psychoeducation, or even what I'll talk about later, mental health literacy, these are things that, you know, we need to pay attention to, right? Because we need to harness what already exists and highlight the differences and do our psychoeducation in a culturally competent way. Also from our findings, we realize that, you know, there are coping mechanisms that already are in place, right? So there's things that, you know, I want to add when I do mental health literacy programs, or I go into a community and I want to do psychoeducation, but I want to know what already exists, what already works, because I want to harness that. I don't want to go into a community and say everything you're doing is false. We want to harness what already exists. And so the other thing also is that Arab Muslims may rely on these more than some of the methods that we're giving them, right? So if we can integrate them, then they'll be more powerful, and it'll increase utilization, hopefully. So as there are several levels, right, there's also coping mechanisms that exist on each of these levels, and I'll talk about those briefly as well. On the individual level, you know, some of our participants talked about self-help, right? So like some of the common things we hear about, like exercise or yoga or meditation or even like journaling, are super helpful. And some of our participants talked about religious practices, you know? Like when I'm feeling stressed, I like to read Quran. It helps calm me, it helps soothe me. And that's something we want to harness, right? And other types of religious practices. On the interpersonal level is family social support. And the thing about family social support is that Arabs are so close to their families, right? We grow up together and we're sort of very tight-knit. And the thing that we found is that if the family is supportive of them seeking services, then they are more likely to seek services, right? And so it really depends on that family system. And so when we're going into the community, we have to think about, are we reaching the second, third generation of Arab Americans, or are we also reaching their parents, right? Because that's important as well. I know I'm short on time. On the community level is community social support. So, you know, in our communities, is the imam talking about mental health in the khutbah? Is it part of our dialogue? And I know some people say like, oh, we shouldn't use stigmatizing words like therapy, right? But I think that's what's keeping therapy stigmatized, right? Like we should use those words because that's what's keeping them stigmatized. We're sort of like tiptoeing around the issue. And we're, you know, always talking about, oh, anxiety or stress, right? But people experience schizophrenia. People, there's severe mental illness, right? So we need to talk about them to normalize them. And then also religious healing, right? You know, majority of our participants discussed, you know, going to an imam for ruqyah. That happens, right? And that's a huge part that we need to harness. And I think one of our major findings is that there needs to be an alliance between imams and mental health professionals, and they need to be able to refer to each other depending on the needs of the client. On the larger environment, I'll just talk briefly about some tangible obstacles, right? So there are some tangible obstacles, right? Underutilization might be caused by stigma and some of these other cultural barriers, but then again, some people don't have the appropriate insurance, some people don't have the right access, right? Or there's long waiting lists and they never get to see anyone. So that's still a major problem too. Implications for counselors and practitioners. I think from our entire study, I mean, I had to summarize a really large study into a short amount of time, and there's many other things I wanted to talk about, but these are sort of the three main things that I think came up and are important for me to relay. One, I think, is obvious, right? Cultural and religious competence, right? And I know that not everyone can achieve competence, but you can work towards it, right? So if you tend to work with a Muslim or Arab population, then you should become culturally competent in these issues, right? And don't assume that because you identify with those identities that you understand everything. Because I don't, right? And we need to learn about our community, and we need to learn about ourselves. 50% of our laypersons actually expressed a preference for a Muslim provider for several reasons, and one of them was fear of prejudice or fear of being misunderstood. And they also, and this is really interesting because I think when we learn ethics, right, as counselors or professionals in the field, we learn that, you need to separate your professional work, right? It's unethical if, you have multiple roles in this person's life. Actually, Muslim Arab Americans are saying, I want to see you involved in my community, right? So the ethical guidelines that are sort of westernized might not apply to Arab Muslim Americans, and I think that needs to be pushed. We need to start thinking about, I think they came out with ethical guidelines for Native Americans, right? And it's very specific to their needs. And I would love to see something like that for Arab Americans. And lastly, alliance of stakeholders. Alliance between imams and mental health professionals, and that they're meeting each other, right? And there's respect for each other, right? There's an imam who says, and I didn't include the quote, but he says, what I do is mental health, what you do is mental health, but we need to meet each other somewhere in the middle. So that sort of concludes the study that we did, and some of the, I just wanted to highlight some of the results. But currently, I constantly think when I'm, in this research field, I don't just want to do research, right? I want to do research that can be implemented, that can, can do something for the community, right? I don't want to just publish studies and just sit back and have these lovely titles next to my name, right? I want to do something. And so one of our next steps is to sort of implement a mental health literacy program, which I'm in the midst of developing that, and I would love to collaborate with other people. I think I have my contact information next, but feel free to reach out to me. I sort of want to go create a program or curriculum that can be implemented in communities. And I want to do more PAR research, right? And PAR research means that you actually allow the consumers to take control of the research questions, right? It's not just researchers going into a community and learning about the community and publishing something. I want to know what the community wants, what needs they have, and help them develop their own studies. So that's just a little bit of my long-term goals. So yeah, I'll conclude there. Thank you everyone for having me.
I think you had the first question from last session. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you both for the presentation. I think the great studies both of you. Dr. Hickman, right?
Yes.
Yes. The way that I'm looking at the new study, which is a great study, I really look at it as it is between before and after 1991.
No, definitely. In our question, yes, we have some of the question asking about the previous trauma, and we will call it pre-trauma or before and post-trauma about them. But we don't know when, we didn't study them when they was there. When they came, we asked them the question about their condition back home.
So two questions.
Correct.
One, did you do regression analysis for Muslims alone and the other Kurds alone?
Yeah.
And or did you do two-way maneuver to see interaction between time and the group, if there is any differences? Because we know Muslims, they don't drink as much as, if they do, as Kurdians. They don't, more we're exposed to the war in Iraq. So interaction and think that's probably something that I would like to see. Did you have a chance to do that? Or?
No. In fact, in this presentation, I didn't have the chance. But in fact, we published, but not on the same topic, because we have a longitudinal study, in fact, on an Iraqi refugees for 5 years. Since they arrived, within 1 month, they arrived to the United States, and we follow them, and we have all these questions. We have about 120 questions with about 600 variables. It is it's the NIH grant. It is for 5 years, and we did all these analysis you are thinking about, and we have until now about 7 publications among Iraqi refugees and their acculturation, trauma, PTSD, depression, all these things. But in fact, for this particular thing, no, I didn't did the interaction.
Okay. And the last point, I would not be surprised that women have more depression. Actually, I have 3 studies that all of them say Arab women, Muslim women have more, significantly more depression than I mean, we just present the data, and then professionally can explain that. That's, thank you. It is consistent.
But it's comparable to the general population. You do see women
Yes.
in general has more depression than women.
No, this is in fact, if you allow me to just answer, this is a fact. If you now go to the disability, and you will find the mental disability among women, refugees, is much higher than among male. Yeah, these are facts, in fact. And our data also prove that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? Dr. Abbas, you have?
Mine got answered. I wanted to know more, like, are you gonna study just trauma, impact of trauma?
In fact, we did a study of the trauma, and we published one paper on trauma among Arab and refugees. As I said, we have a very big sample, and it is a random sample. We have 300 Arabs from about 10 Arab countries, which have no war, and we have refugees, and we got only Iraqi as to have a uniform group, and the trauma exists on the refugees much higher than the trauma exists among Arab, and that is why I mentioned in our study the Gulf War was playing a big role on the trauma and the mental illness. In Arab, they have a trauma. One of the examples is trauma on women, for example. In Arab, the big trauma back home. Just you have to be 100% housewife. Even myself, when I came, I gave the freedom to my wife in the United States. Yeah, because my thinking, although I spent 6 years in the United Kingdom, but I grown in a culture where the man is the head of the home, and his word, it does not break whatever so. That is our culture. But not now, myself, because she is here. Yeah.
I think we need to change the conference to women, Muslim, and
No, I am glad, in fact, to see large attendance of women at me, because even in the clinic, if you have a woman psychology or psychiatry even, the woman could be more open to her than to the man. So I hope that in the future we have more. In fact, in my area, I am within university, as I am here 22 in the university, we have about 7 students, PhD. Out of the 7, 5 of them female, and 2 of them are male. Yeah.
Thank you. Sarah, I have a question for you here on the note card. You mentioned teaching ways to deal with evil eye as a coping mechanism. Are you advocating that, good or bad? So open-ended question, I think. Just to elaborate more on the evil eye.
Does this work? Okay, great. I think, when someone's seeking an imam, right? Let's say they feel that they're inflicted by evil eye, they're seeking advice from an imam. That's the kind of education that I'm talking about, just to make that more normalized in general for the community, so that it's not something that's stigmatized or taboo. And therefore their questions can be answered, right? So if they believe that something is caused by evil eye, if they can cross that off the list and say that's not actually the cause, then maybe they can open up to look at other causes. That's what I meant.
Yes.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you
Hi.
very much for your presentation. I'd like to just hear a little bit more about your vision for the literacy program. I'm familiar with the concept and more familiar with literacy sponsors, so kind of our mentorship, and people who help enculturate people. So I would just like to hear more about your vision.
Yeah, that would be great. Actually, I'm in the process of developing, right? So I'd be more happy to hear you talk to me more about it. But I think some of my ideas, I know that Dr. Corrigan does a lot of stigma research, right? And he talks about, okay, how do you defeat stigma? What are some of the approaches to defeating stigma? And he came up with 3 ways, right? So the first way is the, protest approach, which is like, don't say this is stigmatizing, don't do this, right? And it's a list of don'ts. That doesn't always work, right? It's somewhat effective, but it's not, sometimes when you tell, if I tell you now, like, don't think of a white bear, like you're thinking of a white bear. So sometimes it's not as effective. The second approach is the psychoeducation approach, right? Talking about what is mental illness, what is schizophrenia, what is borderline personality disorder, what are the symptoms, what are the causes, right? So some of that psychoeducation. And that seems to be, in the literature, somewhat effective, but I think the most effective, and something that I want to utilize, and I think he calls this the contact approach, but I could be wrong, but it's basically the idea that you're involving consumers, right? You're involving individuals with, lived experience, right? To come and talk about their experiences. Therefore, you dispel the stigma in minutes, right? They can talk about what it's like for them, what it looked like, what does stigma, what does mental illness look like, and they can answer those questions from, first person. So I think integrating some of those concepts, I know for the Mental Health Awareness Conference that we organize at TC, that's a student-led conference, and what we like to do is invite speakers with lived experience to talk to the audience. And while that's more of like an academic setting, I hope that the mental health literacy program would integrate some of those themes.
Kind of reminds me of the narrative of pain, that panel later, and also a facet of the MOVE organization, where they're asking people to share their stories and art and things about their experiences.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, thanks.
I have a question, or maybe open-ended. How do we, so Arab culture, Arab Americans, there is an idea that there's a man in the house, head of the house, and how do we approach that without telling them your culture is bad, you need to change, and you need to not be the head of the, I mean, that's not going to work, that's combating someone's culture. And I don't know if that's a bad or good thing. I think we need to go into it with non-judgmental, like this is their culture. Right now, if you're beating your woman or something, that's completely different, that's terrible. But if there's a setup in a household where there's a breadwinner and there's a housewife, how do we go about that without stigmatizing that? Because, like, for example, my wife is a housewife, and she feels good doing that, being at home with the kids. But and she's at PH, right? But she comes sometimes to these types of conferences, she's like, they're just making it look like I'm oppressed. And I think that, so how do we approach that without making the housewife seem like she's oppressed or that she's belittled? Especially someone like, and I'm giving it from my personal experience with I'm a psychiatrist, she's at PH, she's someone who's highly educated. And there's many others like that. And I think that often we come to these and then we go home and you cause an existential crisis or something in the woman. So it's more of an open-ended discussion. What do you guys think of that? And how do we approach that without judging someone's culture and saying bad, bad, bad? And a second part to that is, yes, there's a lot of abuse in Arab culture in the Middle East, as is in the West, as is in Europe. But there's also family structure and good things, and how do we also start highlighting those positive aspects to mental health that exist in the Arab world, rather than just focus on the fear and the scary stuff and telling people, everyone's battered and badgered and traumatized. Well, no, but there's also family structure. In my village, my mother's village in Lebanon, there's somebody with schizophrenia who teaches at a school. He's a high school teacher. Lived all his life with schizophrenia and never took medications, and he's schizophrenic, but he has that family structure. So sometimes I think we focus a lot on the negative, and we're not highlighting the very positive aspects of it. And that's something I'm interested in as an Arab American psychiatrist and things like that. But so I'm going to leave that to you guys as a discussion. It's a long discussion point.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and relevant question. Like in my presentation, I talk a lot about like harnessing what already exists. And I think when you go into a family home, right, we're not there to say your family structure, your culture is wrong, right? It's only if something is problematic that we would step in and say, okay, maybe we should challenge some of the issues that are happening, right? But we wouldn't go in and say, you have a family structure that's working for you, but we think you should replace it with westernized cultural views. That's not at all like what I would say we do. But I think it's also important at the same time to sort of challenge some of the gender roles as well, because I think sometimes some families might not feel comfortable speaking up or saying how they feel because of the power differential that exists.
Let me give you some example. The most important issue to make any change is to build a trust between you and the client or in the home. One of we collect these data, 5,000, from different area, from different society, and we select 350, in fact, and it was 400, and then we exclude, we end with the 350. Although in our study was 337 because we exclude Armenian and some Christian people. That's not my question. When I send people to home to do the survey, we visit 350 homes. First of all, I chose man and woman to enter the home. Because, for example, if you go to Yemeni home, man, he cannot enter the home whatsoever. So it should be female. And the female also cannot enter the home unless the man at home, and for the first time. So first of all, we have to know how to enter the home. Second, sit, have a coffee, don't talk about your issue at all. Just build a trust and tell them why you are coming for building cooperation, for research, help the community, not yourself, and so on. And if you build such a trust, after I am making my talk short, after you build a trust, make a community gathering for that group of people. Let them sit with each other and open discussion, not necessarily direct what you are aiming to get from them. Always ask indirect question. And by indirect question, you can come up to any diagnosis you want. And also, you can come to how to help them to overcome that problem. So, need building trust, several visits, make gathering between them with lunch. Without lunch, there is no gathering. So there must be funding sources for anything. And if you do that, increase the gathering, and by this, at that time, you can give a presenter, whether imam or not imam, anyone from the community. By this, you can make some changes in the culture of the people. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have plenty of time. So you said to make change in the culture again. What change do you want to make in the culture?
For example, I will give you our experience. We did two projects, two big projects, and we followed them for 5 years. One on the environment, and one on the coping and culturing to see how we can bring the people to mix with other communities. So for example, for the environment, when we went to the home in the first visit, we looked to the problem inside the home, and we have a checklist. And after we did on 600 homes, we predict where are the most critical bad homes from the point of environment, which affect their health. We was looking to the asthma in particular among those people who are living. And then when we went to visit them second time, we didn't mention that you have all these problems in your home, but we explained the major reason for your asthma and dyspnea is, for example, if you will have a broken window, if you have old carpet, although the owner will not change it, but this is your health. It is not the owner of the home is health, your kid health. So you can hide a cheap carpet and change if it is fear, if it is whenever it is fear, or the type of gas you are using. And in fact, after we did intervention for 3 times, we visited them after another 6 months. and we find a significant changes among those people which we visit in the first time and the second time after intervention with this advisor. Of course, we give a flyer, and at the same time we publish something article and some in the Arab radio and TV, and we did an impact intervention, not only an individual, in the general. And now we will come to about mixing and coping. One of the good examples, how we can encourage the kid to go to the sport, to the gym, and if they can take with them their dad in the beginning to the gym, or the boys in the home, make them feel that they are not different from other community. Why you are segregating yourself only in the community? Go become healthy. You can be more productive. You have voice in the community. Go to voting in the election. So give him power. Let him feel that he can make changes as a power ethnic group in the United States. But this will need a continuous encouragement and a continuous education from the community to the people, from the organization, community organization to the people, and this will follow by session, by gathering, and that is the major issue. You have to bring tool to the community how to make them mix. Why they are separating themselves? Why? They are better than, more educated, they are more hard workers. I am now in front of every one of you. I am 82 years old, and I am still active in the community and in the university. And definitely, if there was better than me young in the university, they kick me out. They not keep me. These are the Arab people usually in general. All the foreigners, they are very hard workers. Give them the strength to work, not to go to welfare and take some dollars to keep in the home. I was telling, for example, when I meet with such type of community people, they go to take welfare and they have money. How they can grow their kid? And if the father lie in the front of the kid that he have no money and he is getting help from the government. That is the big stigma and the big issue in the family. Why? Job is open for everybody if he wants. But unless he wants it in the way he like it, he cannot find it. Thank you. Sorry if I was...
No, that was excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the big surprise here is a very good response, and your age is 82. I would have put you at pay over 50.
We hope to encourage our colleagues to continue on this path.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yeah.
I was interested how much the religious leader, whether they are imam in the Muslim community or priest in the Chaldean communities, because they have more access to the community than the research. So how much did you get the religious leaders involved on this?
To me,
Yeah, in your research.
0. From the Chaldean point, I can't answer from the Muslim. For in this issue, they have nothing to do. The type of involving with the community, not in the way to take out the stigma from the people, especially mental health. Because all of us who immigrated have some sort of mental illness, whether we want or we don't want. Because even we grow, and as I said, I mentioned, I don't believe in the women's rights, for example, before I come here. And he cannot go out without my permission. So these have, I don't think religious could play a big role, but it helps if the people, they can build especially, how I can say, if they can build a good relation to, for example, here, when Imam will be able to come to the general population, to the general, and talk something only positive. Try to make them talk positive to the people, encourage them. Don't let don't let the people hear that they are in a problem. They have a lot of stigma. You have to change. No. Encourage them how to live, how to struggle the life, how to make them hard workers. Because if they go to the job, to the work, there is no problem in the home. Money is coming, the kid can spend a lot of money, everything. But sitting in the home, one in front of the other, going in the end of the month, take a food stamp, definitely a lot of a problem arrives in the home.
Thank you very much. I hope we could take out of this that to utilize more a lot of positive activism and things like that, to also put up the culture and talk about the problems, but also talk about the good aspects of the culture and the things that we have that are actually beneficial, and that some Western countries wish they would have some of those things. So I think we have to really think hard about these panels that we listen to and formulate and come to our various conclusions, and then dialogue about our conclusions. With that said, I really want to thank both of you, Sarah and Ahmad.
Thank you. Thank you.
And let's give them a round of applause.